Good afternoon, everybody. Today I'm chatting with Leigh Curyer from NexGen Energy. Guys, I'm really excited to have Leigh on because Leigh is one of those guys who actually made a major discovery. NexGen Energy is the big uranium deposit that we're all waiting to have go online. And Leigh founded this company over a decade ago, made the big discovery, and now has built what's a multi-billion-dollar company. Stories like NexGen are the exact reason that many of us invest in junior mining. The idea that a company could start off with a small amount of money, hit a big drill hole, and presto, investors end up seeing massive returns. I think it's the whole reason that we all take the risk and invest in junior mining companies. In this interview, we discuss the uranium market, of which Leigh follows a lot of the different stories, knows a lot of the data, reads a lot of the research, and he has thoughts on where the price of uranium could be heading. We also get into the Rook project, which is NexGen's major project, the economics, and what it means for the company when they get to production. And I asked Leigh, if you were a young explorer that had some money to spend on drilling and didn't have a project, where would you go in the Athabasca Basin to go and try to find the next Arrow deposit or Rook project? To which Leigh actually has some pretty interesting advice for us. All right, everybody, enjoy the interview. Leigh, thanks so much for joining us today.
My pleasure, Steve. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. So I spent a good deal of my morning watching interviews of NexGen, and our team sat down and we did our prep. And I saw one interview that you did with Bloor Street Capital, where you said that you thought $150 a pound uranium is going to be a reality in the near future. So I figured we should just hop right into it in this interview. And if I could get your assessment on the uranium market, I assume you spend a lot of time looking at different models and research on the uranium market. What's your assessment of the uranium market, where you maybe see bottlenecks or the future of supply and demand, and where you think it's heading?
Sure, Steve. Well, look, my history is I'm a chartered accountant, and so I'm very financially fact-driven. And my statement regarding our estimation is that the uranium price will go through $150 a pound is based on a couple of factors. And it primarily starts with the current cost of production, both worldwide, but also in the Western world, as the current mines are depleting and getting into a more expensive part of the ore body. Will be no different. We'll start in the easiest part of the most economic part of our ore body. But over time, mines are mines. They get more expensive, not just with inflation, but also with lower grade and more difficult mining conditions. And that is prevalent in the current production profile of world mine supply. When you look at those audited financials and the costs and the amounts that are also deployed in terms of sustaining capex, which often get lost when they're depreciated and amortized in subsequent years, when you add those back, the cost of producing a given pound of uranium is increasing with yearly. Then when you look at the fact that the current producing mines are depleting in the next 5 to 10 years, and then look at advanced development assets, and I say advanced development are ones that can get into production within a 5-year time frame, and looking at those cost structures, and also the fact that a lot of those advanced development mines were in existence during the last run when uranium went from $7 a pound to $136.50, that $136.50 in today's terms is $206 US. And a lot of those mines didn't go into production back in that price environment. And so my assessment, I think, is very, very conservative, that I see a time in the future where prices are going to exceed $150 a pound and most likely go a lot higher than that.
So something I think a lot about, and I'm happy to have you on here because NexGen's obviously world-class deposit, likely the next major project to go into production. And I look around at a lot of these different publicly traded uranium companies that are either exploration or development stage. And something that I feel like a lot of the uranium retail investment community sort of glazes over is how burdensome the taxes can be in each jurisdiction. And then I look at your project, which is well financed to this point, big balance sheet, some really big backers. We even got Scotiabank initiating coverage on you guys recently. Congratulations on that. And I have to think that we got this really big deposit, right? It's going to be producing 30 pounds a year for what's it, 25, 30 years or something like that. And it's high grade. You guys got some huge grades there. To be economic in a place like Saskatchewan, do you have to have a really big project that's high grade given how onerous the taxes can be, or do you think that prices are just going to take care of themselves and retail investors shouldn't be that concerned about how onerous the taxes can be from jurisdiction to jurisdiction?
It's a good question, Steve, and I agree. It's often one that's overlooked. And as you pointed out, the Arrow deposit on the Rook 1 project is one of the world's largest, highest grade deposits that are in existence. It's also in a very competent ground conditions and has very clean metallurgy. And so from a technical, economic, environmental perspective, and also social perspective, as you're aware, we've got 100% community support for the project. It does take an enormous amount of time, energy, cost, and effort to get to even the stage that we're at, which is on the cusp of federal permitting. We have our provincial permit, and we're on the cusp of federal permitting. But the barriers to entry are very, very significant. And ours being very high grade, very economic, all those factors that I listed, we've just passed the 10-year anniversary of the discovery, and our project for £100 million plus project. And I think you need at least £100 million in the Athabasca Basin, considering its location, the ground conditions, the seasonality, for it to be considered remotely developable. Now we've got 350 and certainly exceed that minimum. But yeah, the barriers to entry are significant. Add tax on top of that, even after all of those factors, and it is a significant undertaking, and therefore the list of truly developable assets is less than what I think is advocated at times. As I said, I'm very financially fact driven. I know every project on the globe, on planet Earth. I've looked at them from a technical, economic, and sovereign profile perspective, and I would say the list of advanced development assets that can get into production in the next 5 years is probably only a handful. And we've seen Paladin and Boss Energy this quarter. Well, Paladin have announced commercial production. I know Boss Energy is imminent. But even with those two, it's still not going to make up enough of the demand supply deficit, even with NexGen as well. Like, the world needs 3 Arrows by 2030, and they just don't exist. So that's the number of developable assets in the next 5 years, I think, is around a handful across the planet.
So it's the first time we've had you on. There's going to be some people in our audience who haven't done their homework yet. Can you just give us a quick high-level overview of the Rook project or the Arrow deposit, and also what phase we're in, how close we are to production, and what the next major hurdles are?
Sure. So NexGen, I founded it in 2011. We started drilling, and on the 21st drill hole on the Rook 1 property, we hit mineralization at the Arrow, which is now the Arrow deposit. It was 30 holes later that we hit an intercept, which was ranked 4th in exploration history at the time in terms of a length times grade perspective. That hole is no longer in the top 20 holes, and Arrowhost, all the others drilled from surface. Very uniquely, we basically had 5 deposits side by side in a vertical fashion. And so when we drilled one drill hole, we went through 2 to 3 deposits at once. So the project for a 100 million plus pound project in Saskatchewan, and where we're located, Saskatchewan is the #1 province in the world for developing a uranium project. We developed it and defined it very, very quickly. We immediately knew we were onto something significant, and immediately underwent the engineering, environmental, technical studies, and social studies required for the permitting. On November the 8th, 2023, only about 4 months ago, we received our provincial environmental approval, the first company to do so in over 20 years. And we've been running that process with the federal government in parallel. And we are down to less than 48 aspects to close out in order to complete the federal approval process, followed by a commission hearing, followed by approval. We have 100% community engagement and support evident through the signing of impact benefit agreements. So we have all the engineering done. We know exactly what we're building. We've been doing a lot of pre-construction site works, putting in an accommodation camp that can house the construction crew. We've been upgrading the roads into the project. Everything that we're building is particularly in the underground development and surface infrastructure is close to 100% engineered. There are some remaining detailed drawings around the final milling process and water treatment, but we are ready to go. And the project, as per the feasibility study in 2021, shows extraordinary economics. And at the current spot price, we'll be generating after-tax net cash flow annually at 30 million pounds per annum. That will take us into the top 10 world mining companies, excluding gold companies. So, after-tax cash flow of about $1.6 billion US at $100 spot. And we are completely levered to the future price of uranium. And our contracting strategy is around committing volumes tied to spot at the time of delivery. And due to those competent ground conditions, we can ramp production up, ramp production down without incurring ongoing large annual capex costs, because once you bore a hole into the competent basement rock, it'll stay open for thousands of years. So very, very unique position. And at 30 million pounds per annum will equate to around 23% of world production when in operation. And 23% of world production, to put that into context, Saudi Arabia produces 12% of the world's oil. So for an energy fuel, and one which is being recognised amongst world governments as carbon free, and over the life of a utility, the lowest cost of power, I'm glad we did all that work back in 2011 to discover this asset and get it ready for, on the cusp of federal approval and immediately into commercial construction.
So Leigh, you made what's probably one of the most notable discoveries in mining probably over the last 20 years. It's got to be up there and probably top 10 in the world. Now, let's say that a young guy approaches you and he says, I want to find the next Arrow deposit. I want to find the next big uranium discovery in the Athabasca Basin. I've got some cash set aside. I've got a vehicle. I've got a drill team. I'm ready to go, but I don't have a project. What advice would you give them? I don't know if you're willing to say it publicly, but what would you say to them about? I've heard people tell me that making a discovery in the Athabasca Basin is like finding a needle in a haystack. What advice would you give to somebody that was trying to go out there and find and make a discovery in the Athabasca Basin?
Well, that guy was me back in 2011, except I didn't have the cash at the time, apart from myself and friends and family and some long-term supporters, which did support me. Having said that, we were also on top of the timing. We're going to a part of the basin where there'd been limited discoveries in the past. The eastern side was synonymous with all the producing assets, and there was a perception that you couldn't find an economic resource over the southwestern side of the basin. I put together a good geological team, and really NexGen was the or the outcome of 10 years in the industry, both in junior mining in Australia and Toronto, but also some time in private equity. And so it was an outcome of that experience which led me to these properties. Got very strong support from Richard Patricio, Mega Uranium, where we acquired the properties, and just set about doing an objective process with what I thought were objective geologists. And we came up with a set of targets, and fully transparent, Arrow was ranked number 7 out of 12 initial targets. And we hit it, we drilled it though as our third target because of proximity to the lake during winter. And we're very fortunate to hit on the first drill hole, a drill hole that the next closest drill hole is 4.5 kilometers away. And so exploration requires many efforts, not just mine, not just the geologists at the time, but also all those geologists that had done the work preceding, 30 years preceding that. In the area, the surveys, the Geological Society of Saskatchewan have a fantastic database of all drill holes ever drilled in the Athabasca Basin. And so the information is there. I think our fortune was in the timing of making the discovery. And we still haven't drilled our deposit or our Rook 1 project whatsoever. Like, we could have 10 drill rigs there for 20 years and still not complete the geological evaluation. In fact, only last month we've hit new mineralization on a completely separate corridor, 3.5 kilometers away from Arrow. And we're in the very early stages of understanding that system. That person coming up to me today, and there are, like the Athabasca Energy, got a large portfolio over our side of the basin. Some of their land is contiguous with ours. Troy Beaujolais used to work for NextGen. And, my personal disposition, I rather have properties with very few drill holes in them, but in the right address, as opposed to properties that have had extensive drilling and not really discovered anything. But that's my personal disposition. That's what was NextGen. And we're happy to test current thinking. And a lot of these great deposits have been discovered through testing conventional group think and saying what is possible as opposed to what isn't. And I love that scenario of someone coming and saying, look, I've got some money, some drilling, a drilling team, and I'm in the right address. I think the southwestern section of the Athabasca Basin is where you need to be. And there's ourselves, there's Fission, Athabasca Energy, as I said, very large land position contiguous with our property, and there's a lot of drilling to be done.
Now, one of the things I noticed when we were going through your technical report and your financial statements is that there are 6 royalties on 32 of the claims, 6 of the 32 claims. Is it fair to assume that you guys are going to, in your production plan, go and mine the claims that don't have royalties on them first? Is that how that would work?
Arrow, of which we're seeking final federal approval, does not have a royalty on it.
Okay.
Given that its location on our claim, there are certain tenements within Rook 1 that do have a royalty on it. We have an option. It's the 2% NSR. We have an option to buy back 1% of that for $1 million. There's also, on certain parts of our Rook 1 tenements, a 10% carried interest. For the foreseeable future, we don't see the drilling and extraction from those areas that currently have the royalties over them or the 10% carried interest.
So, as I said earlier, Scotiabank initiated coverage on NexGen with a $13.50 price target. When we look at your shareholder base, you obviously have lots of really strong institutional investors in already. I'm curious because you get to see the uranium sector from a very different lens than most people. You get to sit down and talk to real institutional investors, not like those shady hedge funds in Canada that sometimes people call institutional investors. You're sitting down and talking to the big funds that have the big money, and they're asking you questions. I'm curious, what are the concerns they have or the things that they're asking you about?
Yeah, that's another good question. I would say, and as you alluded to, we've recently, over the last 6 to 8 months, had a changeover of our major shareholder, which was Leigh Curyer out of Hong Kong. It's been replaced with Australian-based investors. That's why I'm spending more time in Sydney and Melbourne and in Australia with respect to servicing that demand. And so a large percentage of our shareholder base is now residing in Australia. And also the US, the very large generalist funds have a very strong energy thematic, investment thematic, and that is centered on nuclear energy. And so what they're really have been focusing on is the uranium market and getting a gauge on where the price of uranium can go, and therefore then looking at leverage to that future uranium price. And so in NexGen, they see tremendous leverage to the future price of uranium because we're completely levered to it. We're completely unhedged. We're not fixed on any of our future production. And given those cash flows, which would take us into the top 10 of all mining companies worldwide, excluding gold companies, we generate phenomenal returns. Payback period at the current spot price is based on the 2021 feasibility study is around 7 months. So it's inherently financeable. I think it's really good news for all uranium companies out there that the energy focus is very, very strong amongst the large generalist funds. Scotia initiated coverage on us. Goldman Sachs initiated coverage on Cameco yesterday. And at the BMO conference, we'd never had a busier schedule, and it was dominated by large global generalist funds. So I think that's very encouraging for all uranium companies out there developing projects, and particularly those that are fully levered to future prices, as NexGen is and will continue to be.
Okay, Leigh, last question for you. If I'm an investor watching, or I'm thinking about hopping in and I just want to follow the story, what does the remainder of the year look like for the rest of 2024 in terms of milestones, timelines? If I'm trying to watch for the next major hurdles, what am I looking out for?
Yeah, look, it's been a very busy 10 years, but I think 2024 is going to be our busiest, particularly with news flow. We are in the final stages of closing out the remaining aspects of the federal permit. We have full community support. We have the provincial permit. And so I believe an update on that will be imminent. We are going to be appointing a shaft sinking contractor in the near future. We're putting down long lead time items or deposits on long lead time items around construction. The pre-construction site activity is ongoing. And with all of this, we've also got exploration running in parallel. And a month ago, we hit another terrific intercept on a completely separate corridor and system to the Arrow deposit. It's in the early stages, but to put it into some context, we didn't hit mineralization as we've seen in this hole until the 27th hole at Arrow. And I mentioned earlier that it was the 30th hole that really unlocked it, and the rest is history. We're very excited about this new area. It will require a lot of drilling, but it can be a complete game changer to what is already such an incredible story that's getting executed here. So lots and lots of news flow, lots of activity, and a very exciting time in the company's stage of development in terms of securing that federal approval and getting into construction.
Yeah, well, Leigh, thanks so much for hopping on here. We don't get to talk to many people who have made discoveries like you have. So we really appreciate you taking the time to hop on here. I know you're a very busy man. So thank you very much for hopping on here. Hopefully we can get you back on in the future as the story develops. And I congratulate you on all the success you've had to date. And I wish you to continue to have this success, because we don't get a lot of huge success stories in the Canadian junior markets. And I love seeing stories like yours. So thanks so much for coming on here.
Appreciate that, Steve, and certainly appreciate your support. And it's this type of support which does encourage those new guys out there to raise some money and get their stories known and get the drill bits going, because that is key to unlocking future deposits. And any platform that encourages that, I'm more than happy to come and speak anytime.
Thanks so much, Leigh. All right, everyone. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this interview, please smash that like button, subscribe, and ring that notification bell. Also, let me know what you think in the comment section. Thanks, everyone.